Good afternoon. Welcome back to AM FM 247 Cool Your Heels with Lillian Caldwell and Passionate World. Talk radio, the world in your hand. Lillian's interviews. And today her special guest is Dr. Clarence Davies, who wrote a book called I Deserve to Live. So good afternoon, Doctor. How are you?
Man, I'm doing just fine. How about yourself?
Well, I'm waiting for it to rain. It keeps on getting really dark outside, and then it says, no, I'm not quite ready yet, and then it kind of lightens up. So we've been through this cycle a couple times now.
Where are you located?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. You should have been getting the same weather that we've been getting in Baltimore.
I'm sure we have. I know up in Boston they're beginning to feel the heat up there with the humidity. So I don't know. Why? Is the sun out down there?
No, well, it is right now, but it's been raining for almost 2 weeks straight.
Yeah, it's been raining almost 2 weeks straight, too, and our garden can attest it. Our tomatoes look like they're ready to send up the white flag and surrender.
Mine haven't even popped up yet.
Well, maybe there's hope. There's still 4 more weeks of summer. Well, a little bit more if you're not judging by the school year. So why don't you tell everybody why you wrote a book with an intriguing title, I Deserve to Live?
Lillian, it was my life story. My sister and I grew up together, just the two of us, and we misbehaved so much that we got punished a lot. And in our punishment, our grandmother would make us sit on the back steps and hug each other. So we became best of friends and learned to play more with ourselves than anyone else. Although we had a normal life, we would get with the kids in the neighborhood and we'd go up to the park and play tennis and all of those types of things. And as life went on, my sister and I grew up. She went off to college and the draft was going on. And I had to go into the military and I went to Vietnam. When I came home from Vietnam, life has sort of changed. I didn't realize that I had post-traumatic stress disorder, and my sister had just gotten her master's. I didn't know that she had post-traumatic stress disorder either. I didn't know that you could get the same disease, or disorder, I should say, going to college as you can going into combat. And what happened was, when she got married, things did not work well, and her marriage didn't last long. And the things that she experienced in pledging while she was going to college and in her life period caused her to be maladjusted. And her marriage didn't work. And she had married a guy who was a police officer. He was stressed out. And what happened was she tried to commit suicide because she just could not make the adjustments. We took her to the doctors and did all the normal things that families would do for someone like that. But after her third attempt, I was asleep one night. I'd come home, and I heard my uncle running up the steps, calling my name, telling me we had to go to my sister's apartment because she had shot herself. And I thought she had just shot herself. But when we got there, she had expired. And from that day to this day, I've been determined to find out why it is people commit suicide and what it is we can do to prevent it, and also to be able to give the families that are left behind some type of relief from the pain that they are suffering. So that's why I wrote the book, I Deserve to Live. The 10th chapter is devoted to the story that I just told you of my life with my sister. I've talked to a lot of people since then, and they all are mystified as to why people want to kill themselves.
I think that a lot depends, I think, on the personality of the person, but more importantly, I think that they give up on themselves. And society is very willing to let them fall through the cracks.
I think you're right. I think they do give up on themselves because the various stages that you go through before you commit suicide, first there's a self-image problem. And that can come out of a dysfunctional family that's labeled codependency. And in codependency, you have a stressor. And usually the stressor, the mother or the father, or it could be an older sibling, is so forceful and so controlling of that person's life that they never find out who they really are or are able to fulfill any of their dreams. A lot of times in codependency, the children have to fulfill the dreams of their parents.
Yes.
It could be going to college, and they don't want to go to college, or in a field of study that is not theirs. And this creates stress.
I think, too, that parents who are gifted, talented, are bright, all of the above, sometimes push their children to where they believe they should be, whether or not that particular child is up to their particular vision. So it's even more than just living through your child. It's almost demanding that this child succeed against any and all odds so that the child themselves ceases to exist, and actually it's their parents who are now living their life in their body. Kind of like what I call possession of the living.
It is. It's actually an enmeshment. The parent and the child actually become one. The parent is so overbearing that they have to think, the child has to live, think, and breathe as the parent wants them to. An example, let's say that you have a narcissistic dad. He wanted to play baseball, but he was ridiculed and was never successful at it. So when he has a son, he is on that guy's back day and night for him to be the very best. You can usually identify him as the father that comes out of the stand and will challenge the umpire when a bad call is made against his son. Or he may be the dad that's getting in a fight with another dad in the stands because his child is him.
Yes, and there's no differentiation between either one. And that's where it gets, you really, these kids don't really have a chance because they never really grow and evolve or develop into anything. They're just sort of pushed away so they don't exist. But I also think I had a friend in school, in high school, and we were both in the same French class. And she had a sister who was in the Sorbonne. She had a younger brother who was a virtuoso on the violin, and then just came her. And right before she graduated, I don't know what she did, but she got herself involved in a car accident. And when the parents were concerned about their mental health, so they were going to put her into a mental health facility, hospital. And they asked her, well, do you want to stay? And she says, I want to stay permanently. And when you hear a high school student at 17, 18 making a commitment for life to shut herself away, to me that's committing suicide, only you're still alive.
I would agree with you, and sometimes what that is an example of the car accident. A lot of people want to take their life, but they don't have the courage. And I thank God they really don't, because more people would be taking that life. But they will use drugs, alcohol, or reckless driving under those circumstances to try to create an event that will take their life. And all too often the person does not die, but they end up being severely crippled or damaged. And in this young lady's case, she found solace in being committed. some kids will do anything, take their life, go to prison, run away from home, just to get away from that stressor that's in the family. They can't take it any longer. It's too painful. We can't fathom the pain that they're going through. We just can't.
And yet you really feel for them because they really haven't grown. They really haven't done anything yet with their life, and they're already willing to throw it away. And to me, that's very scary because you change as you grow. I mean, that's one of the beauties of being able to develop. It may not come out the way your parents specifically want you to go, but you're going in the direction that you feel comfortable in, and that's all that's important. But I think that in our society where kids see on these games that there's no such thing as death, so they put themselves in situations where their experiences can lead them to death, but they don't believe they're going to die. So it's almost as if they're daring themselves to commit suicide as many times as they want because they feel that they'll always survive, that they'll live forever. And that's not quite it either.
You know, there's so many pages to that book, and you're on one of them. And what we find out in the codependent family, the reason why people will try to commit suicide, but they won't talk about why, is because a narcissistic parent has rules. And the number one rule is you never talk about your problems to anyone. They get them at a very young age. I mean, a young age. Vision this for just a minute, Lillian. Here is an adult, at least 5'7", or if it's a male, even taller, bending over a 2-year or 3-year-old child, leaning down into their face, shouting and telling them what they will and what they will not do. That's frightening.
Yes.
This is a person that they're supposed to love and be cherished by, but instead they're being told, whatever happens in this house, you better not tell anybody. You better not tell a soul. They're threatened. And the number two is it's okay to pass on your open feelings only to me. You can't tell anyone else. And it's not okay to express yourself. You're not okay to be emotional with people because the narcissistic parent very seldom gives a child love and affection.
Well, they can't love beyond themselves.
And this is why when they grow up and they marry, and this is what took place in my household. It doesn't give me any pleasure to, but I have to tell the truth, though. I have to tell the truth, or other people won't be healed. They'll feel that they're out there all by themselves. We are taught and we are expected to always say kind and loving things about our parents, always. But very few people are raised by perfect parents, if any. Our parents do much damage to us. And what happened between my sister and I, we both grew up under the same conditions, but my sister was a favorite to be something special by my grandmother. So she paid more attention to her and tried to bend and shape her will into what she wanted my sister to be.
Yeah.
And she broke under the pressure.
Yeah. And it happens. My cousin was brought up or favored by Grandma over me and my brother. And he did real well, I guess, until he finally got involved with the drug scene. And that really sort of broke her up. She could not understand. And, of course, I wasn't a favorite because I started to rebel quite young.
Okay.
And told her, well, what do you expect? I said, his mother hangs on to him. His father doesn't know what to do with him. and you're trying to twist him into something he's not, what do you expect him to do? You're not leaving him very many choices. He's either going to cut his wrists and bleed in the bathroom, because that's the going norm now for college kids. He's going to go into drugs, or he's going to become an alcoholic. I said, you're taking away all his choices. Of course, she didn't want to hear that from me. But it's one thing to believe that you're helping somebody and maybe offering them your experiences for them to choose from them so they may be able to follow in your footsteps. But it's quite another thing when you start demanding that they start following in your footsteps. And that's where a lot of parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and teachers start really failing to see the negativity that they pass on to the child. My brother and I were 18 months apart. He was very smart, and I was a late bloomer. There was no way I would get the marks he did, but I want you to know that I spent most of my time in closets and at the principal's office because I was never able to be as smart as my brother, and as a result, I got punished for it. It's a good thing I'm a survivor and I know how to bounce back to my feet, because anybody else would have committed suicide a long time ago.
Yeah, and that's a sad part of it, because a person, it's really a case or situation of being bullied.
Yes, that's exactly what's happening.
Mm-hmm. And when you have bullying, you have various degrees of loneliness, and it gets more severe as the person gets older. And you'll notice this by how they start disconnecting. First, they're told to disconnect. They're not allowed to connect. Then they find that the only way they get peace is to disconnect from everybody. And when you do that, the pain of loneliness starts to really play with your mind. There's abandonment issues. There's rejection. And these are the elements that come together to create a continuous atmosphere of pain. You don't know how to answer people, and sometimes these persons are criticized, especially the younger they are, because school-age kids are brutal. I'm going to say that again. School-age kids are brutal. They can really lay it on another kid.
Oh, yeah.
And if they can't go home and share it with their mom or their dad, and sometimes it might be an older sibling that has been forced to raise the other siblings while the single parent has to work, was not there. They don't like doing that. They are robbed of their childhood, and they take it out on their siblings. And sometimes, if you have 3 or 4 kids, the youngest kid catches the brunt of it from all the other kids that are older. So where do they go? They're lonely, they feel abandoned, and they feel rejected. And the pain becomes unbearable where they just don't want to live.
And you're seeing that a lot now. For all the advances we have made in mental health, and for all the advances we have made to stop bullying, it's still there. It's still very prevalent in our society. And I believe it's because society has a way of looking the other way. Or they quote you, I'm sure Mr. Darwin was a very good scientist, and I'm pretty sure his notion that survival of the species is with the strongest. But sometimes it's also with the weak link. But to have it hurled in your face all your life, be told, well, you're the weak link, and it's people like you who should be sacrificed first to appease the gods, just doesn't seem like the right way to have your civilization go. And yet, a lot of that type of expression is being told to kids and to adults all the time.
One of the things that I get a lot in counseling from women of all ages, after they've been there for maybe 6 months to a year and we really get comfortable with each other, they all reflect back on why could they have not had a dad like me? I'm not talking about who looks exactly like me, but was patient, kind, and understanding and not demanding of them. They tell me that they would have avoided a lot of promiscuousness coming up. And I had to sit back and take note of that. That's just another way of children rebelling and sending notice to their parents. I'm not happy with our relationship. I don't feel good in the family. When we have children that are rebellious, then we need to look at ourselves. But a lot of times the parent is not well either, and they're going through struggles, trials, and tribulations. Our Creator set up a family to have a mother and a father, if they're all possible. And out of various things can happen where that just doesn't exist. Someone could die early, or due to divorces, we don't have that. In some cases, couples never marry, but they have children. Well, there's going to be an imbalance. A little girl needs to be with her daddy. A boy needs to be with his mother, and vice versa. When girls grow up in a family where they have a God-fearing father, you find that they date later in life. They're not as promiscuous. They don't get pregnant as early. Boys, when they have a father in the home, they learn the sense of responsibility a lot sooner. It's just a lot that we're missing by not having the fathers in the home. And I encourage as many fathers as I can, whatever the situation is that caused you not to be there, try to find a way to correct that, because that's what's going to turn our families around when we get that balance back.
And I think that it needs to be reinforced, because I know that if my father hadn't been around for my son, he would have turned out a lot differently, because I wouldn't have had a male figure there. But the fact that my father took time to be with his grandson made a very big difference.
It did. It did. Now, in my case, my father just chose not to be there, period. I don't remember him ever being there, so he had to have left very early in my life. Fortunately, I lived with my grandfather, but he was not well educated, so he had to work 2, sometimes 3 jobs, which means I saw him around dinner time and very seldom any other time, because he was busy working, because he had a family to take care of. But he did teach me some core values. And since my mother did not remarry, I was fortunate that the other guys that she dated, they were guys of substance, and I was able to learn something from them. Matter of fact, I think something that really helped me in the Vietnam conflict is that the last guy she dated was a Green Beret. And I could not have thought of a more perfect person to watch me go through basic and to mentally prepare me for combat. So God had a way of looking over me and sheltering me. And as I grew older and got to know my father, I realized something, and we don't understand this always. My father could not have been there while I was growing up. That sounds strange to say, doesn't it? What happened, his character and his demeanor was the complete opposite of what I am today. And had he been there with the love that I would have had for him, I would have not have been the same person that I am today.
I think that people need to recognize that in order for them to not think of suicide as a choice for them to take. That people should learn to either do the same thing that they do when they feel like they're going to do something like slap somebody or smash their hand. I think they need to do either start doing some kind of exercise. I really mean it, to take their mind off of the place of where they are now dwelling. Because I know that we're capable of doing it.
The only thing about that, Lillian, is that the atmosphere is not going to present itself, because narcissistic parents, or the stressor, they are constantly in that person's life. They may call them 2 or 3 times in a day. If they go to the mall or the supermarket, even if they're married, they're still calling them and controlling them. So they never really get away from them. And here's something that is not really measured or considered. There is something called accidental suicide. Accidental suicide is when a person's in a stage of notification. They are trying to tell you, I'm so hurt, I am so disappointed in you. The fact that we cannot connect and I cannot reach out and love you and you love me, that I want to send you the strongest message that I can send you. I've rebelled, I've taken drugs, I've gotten fights, all of this. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to fake suicide. Let's say they decide to take a handful of pills. And normally you would get home about 5:30 or 6. So they time themselves so they can take the medication and overdose, fall out, but be discovered. And then rush to the hospital, stomach pumped and so forth.
Yeah.
But this particular day, you don't come straight home.
Yeah.
And that's accidental suicide.
Yeah.
They wanted to send a message, but they did not intend to go through with it.
And it's difficult to prevent something like that. And I know kids who have put their parents through that type of place where they didn't really mean to do it, excuse me, but they did it because they hurt so much. And
their mind and did not want to do it. And in some cases, they were successful in being rescued. That accidental suicide is a very touchy and dangerous one. Kids will take it up to the edge, not just kids, adults too, because there is no age limit for suicide.
No, there isn't. In fact, it reminds me of the kids who wrap cords around themselves to get a thrill, and they don't mean to suffocate themselves that way, but they manage to do it anyway.
I had a young lady lives 4 doors up. This spring, she committed suicide. And I've spoken to her and talked to her a lot. And Lillian, here's the thing. They can mask that pain. They can hide that pain with the prettiest smile, the most pleasant personality. I had no idea. Now, with me, with all of my training, and I loved her in my own way. She was a sweetheart of a child. She was 24. She was working at one of the local universities. And when I talked to her mother, she had the workload of 2 employees on her. And these areas that she worked in at the university demanded excellence in each area. She couldn't bear that. Matter of fact, now that I think of it, she was the same age as my sister, 24 years old. She could not handle it any longer. That was it. When I went in to see my sister, obviously they had lied to us because she didn't just shoot herself, because when we got there, she was already on the coroner's gurney, wrapped up, and all we could see was her face. But you know what? She had the most pleasant look on her face. She had a look as though she had found peace, and all of her pain was now over.
Yeah. I could believe it.
Yeah.
but it's still too bad that she had to go to go in that direction.
And see, we talked about a lot of things. We played, we laughed, we fought. We just did it all. And on her last attempt, when I brought her home from the hospital, I asked her, I said, "Come on, girl, let's talk. We need to talk about this thing." And she said, "No, everything's okay." And a few days later, she came by the house, and she stayed long enough for us to have dinner together. And she was her same old jovial self. And next thing I knew, when she left the house, as she drove away, I had a feeling deep down inside I would never see her again. So the signs are there. We have to recognize them. We have to be educated. I hope people will buy my book because I talk about a lot of things in there about the person's childhood and atmosphere and relationships and the parental structure. I talk about narcissistic parents. I talk about codependency. I talk about depression, substance abuse, family crisis, and violating people's boundaries and not letting people violate your boundaries, and learning to forgive people.
Yeah.
We must learn to forgive those who have hurt us so that we don't go deep inside and destroy ourselves.
So, Doctor, could you please tell everybody where they can find you on the World Wide Web, where they can find your book?
Yes, go to Amazon.com and just put in my last name, Davis, and put in I Deserve to Live. I-D-E-S-E-R-V-E to live, L-I-V-E. And it should pop right up. And if you really want to hear the story of my sister's suicide, I have a TED Talk also. You can go on YouTube and just put in Davis Preventing Suicide. And you'll hear me explain more of my sister's life. I loved her. We had a good time together. She had a weight problem. She was a little overweight, and that was one of the first signs that she was troubled when she started gaining weight. But she was very athletic. She had earned the nickname of Tons of Fun. I mean, she could play tennis. She would swim. She just did it all. She had a lot of fun, and we loved her. But we had no idea of the pain. Well, I had some idea because I was going through some of that pain also. But for some reason, I survived it, and she didn't.
Yeah. And I think, too, that people all have their own secret pain and secret shame, and they're not encouraged to let other people know that they are in this pain. I certainly didn't advertise that I was in a lot of pain, although people knew it and they sensed it because I was always by myself. But, they never did anything about it. It was like, well, let somebody else handle it.
You mentioned shame. We don't understand or talk about shame enough. Every once in a while you might hear a parent or somebody say, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. No one should ever be ashamed, because to be ashamed is to lower your self-esteem to an unbearable level. We need to raise our children's self-esteem.
Yes, we do. I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. You can hear Dr. Davis all over again on amfm247.com /coolyourheels, at passionateworldtalkradio.com /Lillian Caldwell, facebook.com /PWR Network LLC, twitter.com /PWR Network, also on iTunes under Lillian Caldwell. And before you go away and stray, Joseph Conrad had this to say in 1911, a man's most open actions have a secret side to them. Thank you all very much for listening. And remember, please keep listening. Thank you.